Hello and welcome to the Runners World podcast with me, Rick Pearson. Today we're speaking with runner and writer David Smyth about the amazing 1,000 Mile Club. The 1,000 Mile Club runs out of San Quentin Prison in the USA, and David's written a wonderful piece. It's in the current issue of Runner's World, all about the club and some of the characters that populate it. My own running's been going okay. I've been returning to the track a little bit, doing some quicker intervals in preparation for the Cabbage Patch 10 miler on the 15th of October. Let us know how you're getting on with your running, podcast@runnersworld.co.uk, and let's get David on to talk about the San Quentin Running Club.
Guest of the week, here in the studio, guest of the week, sometimes on the phone, could be an athlete, could be a physio, or a complete unknown.
Our guest this week is a writer and runner who recently penned a feature for Runner's World about the remarkable 1,000 Mile Club set in San Quentin Prison. David Smyth, welcome to the Runner's World podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me. Thrilled to be talking directly after the world's best podcast jingle.
Oh, thank you. Oh, what lovely.
Giving him way too much credit, but yeah, thanks. That means that's got to go in the edit as well. David, this is an amazing feature, and I think one that perhaps, I don't know, people maybe imagined existed already, or sort of there's always been that sort of tale about prison and exercise and the benefits and all these sorts of things. But what specifically about this 1,000 Mile Club is so interesting, and what did you find out from writing this piece?
You know, people have heard of the loneliness of the long distance runner, which is about a guy in a young offenders institute who's kind of encouraged to race by people. This is a real thing. It's called the 1,000 Mile Club. It exists in San Quentin Prison, which is in the Bay Area of California, just a bit north of the Golden Gate Bridge. And it's been going since about 2005. And I think there's currently about 80 people in it who commit during their time when they're in San Quentin to run 1,000 miles. Not at the same time. They do. I think the coaches come in on Monday evenings, and they race each other kind of once a month on Friday mornings. And they gradually build their distance up over the year. So they do a kind of benchmark mile in January to sort of see how fit different people are who want to do it, and then they build up to doing a marathon around the prison yard in November time.
And all this running is done from the prison yard, so isn't it? It's like all kind of down. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not allowed out.
Right. It's not treadmill based though, or anything like that.
No, so it's around the prison yard. It's the yard is about a quarter of a mile around the outside. It's gravel and asphalt, and to do the marathon, they have to do 105 laps, there's like 6 right angle turns around this yard 105 times. They don't close the prison yard off or anything, so there's other people sort of milling around. There's sort of volunteers will try and keep the route free. There's Canada geese sitting around everywhere because they're sort of taunting the prisoners, just being like, I could leave for Canada at any time, but I just want to sit here, and getting in the way. And then there's they also have these like quite regular alarms going off, and like an alarm will go off, and it means that something is kicking off somewhere in the prison complex. And when that happens, absolutely everybody has to like get down on the ground and stay on the ground until whatever issue has been resolved. So when they're in the middle of the marathon, they might have to stop and just kind of sit where they are for 15 minutes, 20 minutes before they're allowed to carry on again.
Wow. Oh, yeah.
It's phenomenal, and this is all sort of led by a man called Frank.
Yeah.
And in terms of sort of Coach Frank and the characters within this whole thing, tell us a bit more about Frank and sort of who he is and why he's doing it.
So Frank Rohner is. Well, he was 77 when I spoke to him. I didn't ask him his birthday, so he might be 78 now. He's a US Army veteran. He had his own construction company. He was a manager in a construction company. He was also the president of a local running club to San Quentin, which is called the Tamalpa Runners. He didn't start the club. It was actually a woman called Laura Bowman who was teaching in various ways in the prison. She had the idea for it, and this idea that people can build up their distances and give them like certificates when they've done 250 miles, 500 miles, and so on. A bit like the parkrun t-shirts you get. She wanted someone to take it on, and she asked him did he have anyone at Tamalpa Runners? And he kind of put the call out, and nobody wanted to do it. So he thought he'd go along himself. And he said to me he had no idea he'd still be here so many years later, but he still goes in. And that's the prisoners that I talked to, or the former prisoners that I talked to, stressed that one of the great admirable things about him is that he's consistent. He shows up every time, and he doesn't sack it off because he's not in the mood or whatever. He's there every single time. And when people who've been in the club are released from prison, he's there at the prison gates. There's a runner called Markel Taylor, who we might get to, who Frank gave him his first job straight out of prison when he was released, and they'll invite anybody who wants to join the Tamalpa Runners when they're on the outside as well. So he's a very very no nonsense. He's not particularly chatty. He's quite matter of fact. But again, that's what I think that's what the prisoners admire about him, is he's not there's nothing fake about him. He just tells them what they need to know, and what he wants is to help them to be better runners, regardless of kind of anything else that they've done or is going on in their lives.
Can we talk about maybe a couple of the success stories that people have come through this club and maybe have gone on to be released and are now kind of have credited it for helping to change their life around?
Mm-hmm. So I talked to 3 different former prisoners for the article. I'm not able to talk to people who are kind of currently imprisoned. I just mentioned Markel Taylor. He gets called Markel the Gazelle because he's like far and away the fastest in there. He went to San Quentin he went to prison in 2002. He was moved to San Quentin in 2011, and he got out in March 2019. He spent 17 years, 7 months inside. 6 weeks after he got out, he did the Boston Marathon in 3:03.
Pretty good. Yeah.
And he was able to do that because he got his Boston qualifying time. I'm sure your audience is aware that Boston's hard to get into. You need to have a particular time to be allowed to compete in it. He got his qualifying time by doing the San Quentin Marathon.
Amazing.
That was his official thing. And then in 2022 he did it. He came back into Boston again in 2:52. So he was So he's
the Gazelle. It's a sort of apt nickname, isn't it? I think if you run a 2:52 marathon, you deserve to be called the Gazelle at that point. So
this prison marathon, he's just lapping people over and over again, and just kind of looks very sort of single-minded. So he's out and about now. And then there's another guy who's so there's a documentary about the San Quentin Marathon, which is coming out soon for a special screening in the UK, called 26.2 to Life. Markel is one of the sort of stars of it, if you like, and one of the other ones is a guy called Rasan Thomas, or people call him New York Thomas because he's from Brooklyn and the prisons in California, so he just gets called New York. I really wanted to talk to him because he's such a star of the documentary, but he was waiting such a long time to get out. He got a commutation of his sentence, so his sentence was allowed to end in around the start of 2022. With one thing and another and all the kind of ins and outs of this very convoluted process, he didn't actually get out till Feb 2023. So I had this article ready to go for ages. I was waiting. It was like, Rasan's going to get out. He's going to get out sometime soon. He just kind of comes over as someone with such an amazing attitude to the situation that he's found himself in. He certainly doesn't feel like he does feel like he deserves to be there, but he's made such a huge level of changes in his life. You see his bed in prison is just covered in books. He actually says he struggles to do the running club because he's doing so many other different things. He does the he is out now. So he did do the prison newspaper, which is called the San Quentin News, as a journalist. He did a podcast, which is probably more successful than yours, called Ear Hustle. It won a Pulitzer Prize.
This is Ear Hustle, isn't it?
Yeah, let me just check. No Pulitzers here, I'm afraid. Yeah, you're right. Yes, that's exactly it.
Yeah, it's called Ear Hustle. It's made by San Quentin prisoners. Rassam was heavily involved in that. He thought that he wasn't going to get out till he was 85 years old, and went to his crime was in 2000, and that's sort of part of the frustration of all this is they never really know when they might get out. A lot of them, someone else, another prisoner, Jonathan Chu, or former prisoner who I talked to, said you sort of see San Quentin as your retirement home, like it's a place where people want to go because they want to go. Best of a bad bunch.
Yeah.
So because there are a lot of volunteer programs, including the running club, so it's not a very comfortable place because it's a very old prison. It's built in the 1850s. But there is a lot of stuff going on. So, Jonathan said he sort of sees San Quentin as a bit of a retirement goal to get in there. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you can do. So Rassam does all these loads of different stuff, and it then also kind of very enthusiastically did one marathon in San Quentin in 6:12, and I think set the record for the slowest San Quentin marathon, which he was also just visibly delighted by.
Yeah, I bet. I think this is it's really interesting. Like we talked about this as being the 1,000-mile club, and I think that there's all this sort of the chat these days of running as far as you possibly can and in one go and all this sort of stuff. But the way we're talking about these sentences is we're talking about people who've been sentenced for 50 years for a crime, and that's so for context of the distances that they're actually capable of doing. This isn't a big treat, as you say. The retirement home angle doesn't give it it gives it more of a sense of like they're off doing these. This is, they might have the opportunity to run once a day if they're lucky, and then or is it just the training days?
I'm actually not sure what counts as your mileage if it's just on the days when the coaches when the coaches come in. I mean, the other thing to stress is what a terrible time they had of it during COVID. I was not really aware that COVID lockdowns were way more severe for the prison population and in America than yours or my experience of that. So the 1,000-mile club had to really sort of stop. It's only really started going again this year since 2020, and people were in their cells for kind of 23, 24 hours a day, no visitors allowed. 28 people died in San Quentin of COVID, and 2,200 people caught it during that time. And talking to Frank, he was like clearly really upset to have not been able to get in and do this thing for such a long time.
Why do you think, David, that running seems to work in prisons? What is it, other than maybe making people more physically fit, that that kind of lifts people in that situation, do you think?
So I talked to the maker of the documentary, Christine Yu, and she said something really nice about like wanting to explore whether it's possible to get a sense of mental freedom even if you're physically incarcerated. And I think I'm sure we've all had like experiences of feeling very free on a run. So it's interesting to see that does still seem to be possible even if you're going round and round a prison yard. I think there's benefits to it not being a competitive sport, like if you're on a team having to beat other people or anything else, like you're only really trying to get better for yourself, and it is these very clear tangible goals, like this is how far I've run, and now that I've done it a bit more, I'm getting a bit faster if that's what you want, and so it's sort of very visible that you're improving. And I sort of mentioned before about that they don't really know when or if they're going to get out. A lot of people, as far as they know, are going to be there until they're in their 80s. So to have this thing which does have a finish line, a marathon has a clear finish line. If you can achieve that thing, then it's a very solid thing compared to a lot of things about that existence, which has so much sort of harder to get a grip on.
Do you think that Frank being a veteran and obviously the degree of discipline that an army life would probably bring, plus there's a discipline to running, certainly if you have a target and a mileage you want to get to and you have to sort of consider how that, do you think that that's part of the success? Is it that it's actually just a focus and there's a real discipline to it?
I mean, it does all seem to be like fun, and there's a real sense of community to it, and there's a lot of friendships made kind of across racial boundaries, which is harder to do in prison. There seems to be like a much more kind of impassable racial divide in terms of where people hang out and who they hang out with. The running club is one of the most kind of integrated clubs. In terms of like discipline, I got the impression from the people I spoke to that something they really admire about Frank is that he just does what he says he's going to do. And I think a lot of people have come from maybe broken families, maybe very unstable early lives, and they have maybe people coming in and out of their lives. There's Mark Hale said he doesn't get visited by any family members, so his family to him are these running coaches who come in all the time because they show up. So I think there's a respect for somebody who is just like, this is what we're doing and that's what we're doing today, and I don't care what you did yesterday, and let's not think about what you might do tomorrow. This is the thing that we're doing right now.
This is the Runner's World podcast.
It's quite a serious prison, isn't it, in terms of like the crimes people commit, and I'm sure
It's
there are
got a
people
massive death row.
Right. And there might be people who think that going to prison for very serious crimes, you shouldn't have things like running clubs. There shouldn't be this kind of, even if it's a bit of a mock term like a retirement home,
Yeah.
it should be about punishment. Through writing this and researching this article, what conclusion did you come to in terms of what these kind of things can do for prisoners? I think that'd be interesting to hear.
Yeah, so I mean, San Quentin is a very unusual prison because it has the running club is just one of, I think, about 60 different volunteer things that people can do. You can get people, there's a Shakespeare company comes in and puts on Shakespeare. Mark Zuckerberg has been in to do coding. He doesn't like pop in every week, but he's come by to look into that kind of stuff. Christine, who directed this documentary, she still goes in and does filmmaking, teaches filmmaking skills. And as I said, they've got a Pulitzer Prize winning podcast and a newspaper and all sorts of other stuff. It's more common, I think, in the US for a prison to be like way out in the desert, like somewhere in the middle of nowhere. What San Quentin benefits from is that its location is very close to some wealthy liberal cities, and there are people who do want to come in and help at places like this if they have the opportunity. But if you have to drive 2 hours each way to the desert to do a class in something, you're probably not gonna bother. So San Quentin benefits from a lot of this stuff, and they do see the rewards of it. I mean, there's this idea of sort of lock them up and throw away the key. That's one thing, and like none of these people would feel that they've been unfairly treated by getting a very long prison sentence because they have committed very serious crimes. So the idea of like, so do they deserve a second chance? I mean, it's very expensive to just lock them up and throw away the key with and maybe there are benefits that you might get in another way if you did something more than that. I mean, Rasan has a good quote that he said about sort of his debt. He says the debt I owe I could never pay, but I'm not paying it in prison. Prison was a place to put me to punish me, but it costs $106,000 a year to incarcerate me, and that's money taken away from schools and COVID relief and things like that. So there are certainly the coaches that I speak to as well. They do feel like, these are people that made a terrible mistake when they were usually quite young, And I'm sure we were all idiots when we were young as well, but probably not to the same extent. But I'm not sure there is a real value in just making them pay over and over and over again.
I agree.
That's not to say just let's shut down the prisons, but I think there are, it's definitely shown in these, in some of these, from some of these people from the running club that they are,
can make a permanent change for the better.
They are different, and they want to contribute something to society. I mean, again, Rasan said something to me about not feeling like he was a part of society as a young man, because he was just, the police just sort of let them get on with killing each other where he lived, or where he grew up. But the fact that these people, members of society, these running coaches, are coming in and like treating him with kindness is something that makes him, feel better about society as a whole, and want to be somebody that contributes to society as a whole. By the time the documentary is finished, there's 45 members of the 1,000 Mile Club that have been released. None of them have reoffended.
Yeah, it's pretty telling, isn't it? I think. Yeah.
Whereas I guess reoffend rates are probably quite high, right? I mean. Yeah,
there's another. I had to do a lot of looking into stats. There was a long-term study. It's called recidivism, like reoffending, in the US. They looked at prisoners released in 2005. 5 out of 6 prisoners released in 2005 were arrested at least once in the following 9 years.
Wow, that's so high, isn't it?
So, yeah, there's definitely a case of people kind of just getting in and out of trouble all the time. And there's obviously there's a huge number of other factors. I'm not saying that like running solves
suddenly
crime.
Fixes,
but there is, there's definitely something there that is making these people feel possibly a bit more human, and like they could give some value to the world as people moving forward.
Right.
Is there a UK equivalent? Is there other prisons doing this type of thing? And if not, do you think that that's something that absolutely should be considered?
Well, I had a fairly thorough look. I couldn't say for definite, but I couldn't find a huge amount. I found an organisation called the Youth Justice Sport Fund, which is helping community organisations use sport generally to reduce crime. So that's not necessarily in prison, but it's like using sport programs to help people maybe at risk of that. They did something in a couple of young offenders institutions with boxing and football for young people in custody. There's another organisation called the 3 Pillars Project, which does rugby and mentoring for young people in prisons. I couldn't really find anything running wise other than it turns out there's a park run in an open prison.
Gloucester, is it?
In South Gloucestershire. HMP Leyhill has a park run, which started in 2019. So I think you do actually have to be a prisoner to do it. You can't just rock up on a Saturday morning.
I think that's right. Yeah.
So you need to do a crime first. But that's the only thing I could find running wise.
Yeah, there's room for it, isn't there? There's room for more.
If there is other stuff that we don't know about, let us know.
Let us know. Let us know. Yeah.
But the fact that there is a park run already in a prison, just goes to show like the potential there for similar enterprises and schemes, or however you want to phrase it, but just something that might help.
Yeah. Well, it's the same. I mean, the park run has obviously huge value to the rest of us as well, just in terms of getting those, keeping on going and doing the same thing over again, and seeing your own progress is something that makes you feel good about yourself, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
If people want to find out more about San Quentin 1,000 Mile Club, other than reading your brilliant article out later this month in Runner's World, where else is it being talked about or shown?
So the documentary is, as I mentioned, is called 26.2 to Life. They have a website called sanquentinmarathon.com, where there's info about it being shown. It doesn't seem to be getting a full cinema release like the like Barbie or whatever, but it's it's been going around various film festivals, winning loads of awards, and there is going to be a 72-hour virtual screening window. So 72 hours that we can watch it in the UK between September 29th and October the 1st. And if I can read you a slightly long web address, it's watch.eventive.org with a backslash 26.2 to life. And that's the digits 26, the word point, the digits 2, then the word 2, and then life. That's hard, isn't it? But
we're going to put that in the show notes, David. That was admirable, though. Yeah.
Sorry, that took about half an hour to do that, didn't it?
You regularly write features for the mag, and I was just wondering where this one sits then in sort of comparison to topics that you've covered off before.
I mean, it's way longer than what I normally write. I normally do that bit at the front called Human Race, which is sort of similar in that it's not sort of famous runners and it's not about training stuff. It's always about kind of what running can do for you as a person, or indeed how you can use running to help other people. So I think this is in the same ballpark to that. It's about how running can change lives, and that's something that I love writing about. And I've met so many interesting people and who've done. I've been so humbled by some of the people that I've got to speak to for this magazine. I mean, this was just really, really interesting to dig into, because there's a sort of wider stuff about, like, incarceration rates generally, and sort of the prison system, and whether that actually works, and whether there could be sort of better ways to rehabilitate people. And then it was just I think I did 7 different interviews for this, I haven't even mentioned 2 of the other coaches I talked to, and 3 different people who have since been released from San Quentin. So it was just really great to get to sort of dig into, and as you said, definitely something that ought to be replicated in more places, because it really does seem to have made a difference.
Yeah. David, thanks so much for coming on to the podcast. Thank you for your time. Thank you for writing the piece, and lovely to get you back on at some point in the future.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So that brings us to the end of this week's Run As Well podcast. A huge thanks to our guest, David Smyth, and to you, of course, for listening. Please like and subscribe to the podcast, and if you're feeling particularly generous, give us a nice review. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you again next week.